You want to build what? Was the typical response, followed by a long silence and a hesitant, "Are you sure you have the right number?" "A castle gate, huh?" he said, stroking his beard. "Never done one of those before. Usually it's just decks, patios, that sort of thing." "This is a bit different," I admitted. "Different is good," Bob said with a grin. "Different is interesting. And frankly, after 20 years of building beige boxes, I'm ready for something interesting." "So this drawbridge, it's actually going to work? And are we going to need, like, special permits for the gargoyles?" Moving to Willow Creek Heights was supposed to be a fresh start. After the startup grind, the endless hours, and the eventual exhilarating sale of my company, I craved peace, quiet, and a complete escape from the pressure cooker of city life. What I found, however, was a different kind of pressure, a subtle yet pervasive pressure to conform. The houses were all the same. Rows upon rows of beige and taupe boxes, each with a perfectly manicured lawn, a neatly trimmed hedge, and a complete absence of anything remotely resembling personality. It was like living in a real-life version of the Stepford Wives, only instead of robotic housewives, it was robotic houses. My own house, a modest 2-story colonial, was no exception. It was fine. Beige siding, white trim, a perfectly acceptable, utterly unremarkable front door. And that's where the trouble started. I decided, in a fit of mild rebellion, to paint the front door. Not a shocking color, not anything outrageous, just a deep, rich royal blue. A splash of color, a hint of individuality, a subtle protest against the beige monotony. I just wanted a little color, a little personality, something to break up the monotony of beige and taupe. I thought a royal blue front door was a reasonable compromise. I was wrong. Dead wrong, I thought, as I stood back to admire my handiwork. The blue door, against the backdrop of beige, looked vibrant, alive, almost defiant. In Willow Creek Heights, even a slightly different shade of blue was considered an act of rebellion. I should have known better. The inevitable knock on the now blue door came a few days later. It was a sharp, insistent rap, the kind of knock that radiated authority and disapproval. I opened the door to find myself face to face with the embodiment of HOA tyranny. Brenda Mortimer. Imagine a woman whose wardrobe consisted entirely of beige pantsuits, whose spirit animal was a perfectly manicured boxwood hedge, and whose favorite pastime was enforcing the HOA's endless list of rules and regulations. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of suburban aesthetics, the queen of conformity, and, unfortunately for me, the president of the Willow Creek Heights HOA. She stood on my porch, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon, her expression a mixture of disdain and righteous indignation. "Mr. Smith," she began, her voice as crisp and starched as her beige linen shirt, "I'm afraid we have a problem with your front door." "A problem?" I asked, feigning innocence. "What seems to be the issue?" "The issue, Mr. Smith," she said, her voice rising slightly, "is that it's blue. It's too unique. It doesn't blend in with the established aesthetic of our community. It violates the community vision." She said community vision as if it were some kind of sacred, divinely inspired mandate. "It's just a door, Brenda," I said, trying to remain calm. "It's a color. I like blue." "This isn't about what you like, Mr. Smith," she retorted, her eyes narrowing. "It's about maintaining the harmonious, unified appearance of Willow Creek Heights. We have standards. We have rules." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. "And your bold choice of color is simply unacceptable." Brenda's visit was followed by an official HOA violation notice, a crisp white envelope containing a sternly worded letter, and a threat of escalating fines. The letter cited obscure bylaws, vaguely worded regulations, and a whole lot of subjective interpretations of acceptable aesthetics. The Willow Creek Heights HOA, it turned out, was a masterclass in petty tyranny. They had rules for everything. Rules about lawn height, no more than 3 inches, fence styles, only the HOA-approved colonial picket design, and even the types of flowers you were allowed to plant, nothing too colorful or exotic. They'd banned backyard trampolines, unsightly, outlawed bird feeders, attract pests, and even dictated the acceptable color for outdoor furniture, you guessed it, beige. They sent out monthly newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders about proper lawn care, appropriate holiday decorations, and the importance of maintaining a cohesive community appearance. My internal reaction was a mixture of annoyance, frustration, and a growing sense of disbelief. Were these people serious? Did they really have nothing better to do than micromanage their neighbors' lives and enforce a beige dictatorship? I thought. I tried to reason with Brenda. I pointed out that the blue door was hardly a radical departure from the neighborhood's aesthetic. I explained that I'd chosen the color carefully, that it complemented the house, that it was, in fact, quite tasteful. I was presented with the HOA-approved color chart. It was 3 swatches, each as uninspiring as the last. Off beige, slightly darker beige, the exact same beige but with a different name. But my arguments fell on deaf ears. Brenda Mortimer was not interested in reason or logic. She was interested in rules, in regulations, and in maintaining her iron grip on the aesthetic soul of Willow Creek Heights. The final ultimatum arrived a week later. A formal demand to repaint my front door within 30 days, or face escalating fines and potential legal action. Brenda delivered it personally, a smug smile on her face, a clipboard clutched in her hand. "If you want to live here, you must follow the rules," she stated bluntly. I took the notice, looked at it, and then looked back at Brenda. A slow smile spread across my face. "Oh, I'll follow your rules, all right," I thought. A plan, audacious and wonderfully ridiculous, beginning to form in my mind. Straight into a black hole of bureaucracy. I initially considered complying. Repainting the door would be a hassle, but it would be easier than fighting a legal battle. But as I stared at Brenda's smug, self-satisfied expression, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about a blue door. It was about freedom, about individuality, about the right to live in my own home without being harassed by a power-hungry tyrant. I needed a new strategy, something that would not only defy Brenda, but would also make a statement, a bold, unmistakable declaration of independence. If Brenda and the HOA wanted conformity, if they wanted me to blend in, then I'd give them conformity. But I'd give it to them on my own terms. I'd give them something so unexpected, so audacious, so utterly un-Brenda-like that it would make her perfectly coiffed hair stand on end. And then it hit me. The perfect solution. A medieval castle. It was historical, wasn't it? It technically adhered to the HOA's vague guidelines about blending in with the community's aesthetic, if you squinted and tilted your head, maybe. And it was, without a doubt, the most gloriously inappropriate response to Brenda's demand for conformity that I could possibly imagine. "Brenda Mortimer, you want a war on color? You've got one. Prepare to be castle-fied," I declared internally, a surge of defiant energy coursing through me. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to unleash the full force of my medieval-themed rebellion. My transformation from mild-mannered homeowner to medieval architect began, as most modern endeavors do, with the internet. I needed to immerse myself in the world of castles, fortifications, and gatehouses to learn the language of battlements and drawbridges, to channel the spirit of William the Conqueror, but with, less conquering and more petty revenge. My browser history went from royal blue door paint to medieval gatehouse construction and where to buy gargoyles online in record time, I chuckled as I scrolled through pages of architectural drawings, historical texts, and surprisingly detailed websites dedicated to recreating medieval structures. I learned about the different types of castle gates: the portcullis, the drawbridge, the barbican. I studied the construction of stone archways, the use of timber framing, and the importance of defensive features like arrow slits and murder holes, which, I decided, would be purely decorative in my case. I even delved into the history of heraldry, considering designing a custom coat of arms for my newly christened castle. A garden gnome rampant on a field of beige, perhaps? I started sketching out my plans, filling notebooks with drawings of imposing archways, massive wooden gates, and strategically placed gargoyles. My initial, vague notion of a castle-themed entryway was rapidly evolving into something far more elaborate, far more ambitious, far more ridiculous. A mischievous grin spread across my face as I refined my designs. This wasn't just about defying Brenda Mortimer. It was about creating a masterpiece of suburban absurdity, a monument to petty revenge that would stand as a warning to all future HOA tyrants. Finding contractors willing to build a medieval castle gate in the middle of a suburban neighborhood was, unsurprisingly, a challenge. Most of the companies I contacted were understandably confused by my request. "You want to build?" "What?" was the typical response, followed by a long silence and a hesitant, "Are you sure you have the right number?" But I persevered, explaining my vision, carefully omitting the HOA revenge aspect, emphasizing the need for authenticity and a historically accurate design. I presented my sketches, my research, and my unwavering determination to transform my front yard into a medieval fortress. Finally, I found a company, Old World Construction, that specialized in historical renovations and custom-built structures. The owner, a man named Bob — apparently all contractors are named Bob — was initially skeptical, but he also seemed intrigued by the challenge. "A castle gate, huh?" he said, stroking his beard. "Never done one of those before. Usually it's just decks, patios, that sort of thing." "This is a bit different," I admitted. "Different is good," Bob said with a grin. "Different is interesting. And frankly, after 20 years of building beige boxes, I'm ready for something interesting." His crew, a mix of seasoned carpenters, stonemasons, and a surprisingly enthusiastic blacksmith, shared his sentiment. They'd ask questions like, "So, this drawbridge, it's actually going to work?" And, "Are we going to need, special permits for the gargoyles?" I assured them that the drawbridge was mostly for show, though I did have a small winch installed, just in case, and that the gargoyles were well within the HOA's, admittedly vague, guidelines on decorative garden features. They looked at me, looked at each other, and then shrugged. They were in. They were ready to build a castle. The construction process was a spectacle in itself. Trucks arrived, delivering tons of stone, massive wooden beams, and wrought iron hardware. The quiet suburban street was transformed into a medieval construction site, filled with the sounds of hammering, sawing, and the occasional, accidental clang of metal on stone. My front yard became a gaping hole, a miniature quarry, as the foundations for the archway were laid. The neighbors, understandably, were fascinated. They'd gather at the edge of my property, watching the construction unfold, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and a growing sense of what on earth is going on over there. Children pretended to be knights, defending the nascent castle from imaginary dragons. Teenagers took selfies in front of the rising stone walls. Even the dogs seemed intrigued, sniffing at the unfamiliar materials and occasionally attempting to bury their bones in the newly disturbed earth. Brenda Mortimer, of course, was not amused. She'd storm over, her face a mask of fury, and demand to know what I was doing. "Just some exterior modifications, Brenda," I'd reply, with a perfectly innocent smile. "Making sure my house blends in with the neighborhood. You know, historical accuracy and all that." I'd casually mention multiple times a day how I just wanted the front of my property to blend in. Her eye twitches were becoming legendary. The construction crew, meanwhile, was having the time of their lives. They'd never built anything like this before, and they embraced the challenge with gusto. They'd come up with their own creative ideas, adding extra flourishes to the design, pushing the boundaries of medieval authenticity, within reason, of course. It was a collaborative effort, a symphony of controlled chaos, all orchestrated to the tune of Brenda Mortimer's mounting horror. And then finally, it was done. My masterpiece. My monument to petty revenge. My suburban castle gate. It was magnificent. A 15-foot-tall stone archway, crafted from rough-hewn granite, spanned my driveway, creating a dramatic and imposing entrance. Massive wooden gates, reinforced with iron studs and intricate carvings, stood guard, ready to repel any invading HOA officials. Two fierce-looking gargoyles, perched atop the archway, glared down at the street, their stone eyes seeming to follow Brenda Mortimer's every move. The front door itself had been transformed into a functioning drawbridge, complete with heavy chains and a mostly decorative winch. And, for the final touch, I'd installed a series of torch-style LED sconces, strategically placed to illuminate the entire structure at night, their flickering flames creating a dramatic, medieval ambiance. It was magnificent, it was ridiculous, it was perfect. And it was all completely 100% HOA loophole compliant, as far as I could tell, I thought, surveying my creation with a mixture of pride and amusement. It was a bold statement, a defiant gesture, a giant middle finger to the forces of beige conformity. I added the final, crowning touch. A small brass plaque affixed to the stone archway, reading, "Smith Keep." It was official. My house was now a castle, and I was the lord of the manor. The unveiling of Smith Keep was a moment I'd been eagerly anticipating, and Brenda Mortimer's reaction did not disappoint. I'd timed it perfectly, ensuring that she'd be taking her usual morning power walk past my house just as the construction crew was removing the last of the tarps and barriers, revealing the full, glorious absurdity of my creation. She stopped dead in her tracks, her pastel pink tracksuit suddenly seeming wildly out of place against the backdrop of medieval stonework. Her jaw dropped, her eyes widened, and her face went through a series of colors that I didn't even know were possible. She looked like she'd just stumbled upon an alien invasion, or perhaps a particularly offensive garden gnome convention. Then, the screaming started. This is unbelievable!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that could shatter glass and probably set off car alarms. She stormed towards me, her fists clenched, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "You've turned your house into a medieval fortress. It's an abomination." I emerged from behind one of the gargoyles, a picture of calm, unruffled composure. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice dripping with feigned innocence. "I see you've noticed my exterior modifications. What do you think? I was going for a historically inspired look." "Historically inspired?" she sputtered, her face now a shade of purple that I'd previously only seen on overripe eggplants. "We live in suburbia. There's no medieval heritage. This is This is insane. It's a historically inspired entryway, Brenda. I corrected her gently. I'm simply embracing the architectural heritage of our community. I gestured towards the imposing stone archway, the massive wooden gates, the flickering torch sconces. I'm trying to blend in, remember? Isn't that what the HOA wanted? Blend in? She roared. You call this blending in? It's preposterous. It's a castle in the middle of Willow Creek Heights. Watching Brenda's face contort with rage and disbelief was more satisfying than any approved shade of beige could ever be, I thought, struggling to suppress a laugh. She was practically vibrating with fury, her perfectly coiffed hair threatening to come undone. It was a performance for the ages, a meltdown of epic proportions. And I was enjoying every second of it. Brenda, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding immediate action to address the castle crisis. She envisioned a swift condemnation of my architectural abomination, a unanimous vote to force its removal, a restoration of order and beige to Willow Creek Heights. But she was in for a rude awakening. The meeting, held in the usual beige-walled community center, was a scene of utter chaos. Brenda, looking increasingly unhinged, ranted and raved about the dangers of medieval architecture, the aesthetic blight on the neighborhood, and the urgent need to take action. But the other HOA members, for once, were not swayed. They'd seen the castle gate. They'd seen the crowds of people admiring it. They'd even perhaps secretly enjoyed the spectacle of Brenda's meltdown. Their legal counsel, the long-suffering Mr. Henderson, was forced to explain yet again that there was nothing they could do. The castle gate, he pointed out, violated no existing HOA rules. It was on private property. It was technically an exterior modification which was allowed. And, most importantly, any attempt to force its removal would likely result in a costly and embarrassing lawsuit. But it's a castle, Brenda sputtered, her voice cracking with desperation. It's ridiculous. Yes, Mr. Henderson replied with a sigh. It is, but it's also legal. I, meanwhile, sat in the back row, a picture of quiet amusement. I quoted sections of the HOA guidelines back at Brenda. I referenced historical architectural styles, making it very clear that my keep was designed to blend in. The meeting ended in disarray, with Brenda's demands ignored, her authority shattered, and her vision of a beige utopia crumbling around her. While Brenda fumed and plotted, the rest of the neighborhood was embracing Smith Keep with open arms. What had started as a source of curiosity and amusement quickly became a point of local pride, a quirky landmark, a symbol of Willow Creek Heights' slightly rebellious spirit. Families would stroll by in the evenings, admiring the imposing structure, the flickering torches, and the fierce-looking gargoyles. Children would pretend to be knights, storming the castle, defending it from imaginary dragons, and generally having the time of their lives. Teenagers started using the gate as a backdrop for their social media posts, posing in front of it, striking dramatic poses, and generally adding to the growing legend of the suburban castle. Even some of the older residents, the ones who'd initially sided with Brenda, started to come around, admitting that the gate was rather impressive and added a certain je ne sais quoi to the neighborhood. It became a gathering place, a conversation starter, a source of community pride. People would bring their out-of-town guests to see it, boasting about the crazy castle house on their street. It was a testament to the power of creativity, a symbol of individuality, and a constant, unavoidable reminder of Brenda Mortimer's defeat. And then, the ultimate irony, the local historical society got involved. They'd heard about Smith Keep, seen the photos online, and decided that it was, in their words, a whimsical tribute to medieval architecture and a valuable addition to the community's cultural landscape. They contacted me, offering to officially list the property as a site of minor historical interest. They even proposed adding a small, informational plaque to the gate, explaining its architectural significance and its unique place in suburban history. The irony, of course, was delicious. Brenda Mortimer, in her obsessive quest to enforce conformity and maintain a classic aesthetic, had inadvertently created a semi-historically significant landmark. Her attempt to crush my creative spirit had backfired spectacularly, turning my house into a celebrated example of whimsical architecture. And because I couldn't resist adding one final flourish to my masterpiece of petty revenge, I decided to expand the historical theme. I commissioned a local contractor to dig a moat-style water feature around the base of the castle gate, complete with a small, arched bridge and a few strategically placed, artificial lily pads. It was the perfect finishing touch, a nod to medieval fortifications and a further glorious insult to Brenda Mortimer's beige-loving sensibilities. The HOA couldn't complain. After all, I was simply completing the historical accuracy of the design. The end for Brenda Mortimer came not with a bang, but with a whimper. After weeks of frantic scheming, failed legal maneuvers, and increasingly desperate attempts to rally support, she finally cracked. The weight of her defeat, the public humiliation, the sheer unadulterated absurdity of her situation proved too much to bear. She resigned from the HOA, her letter of resignation a masterpiece of passive-aggressive self-pity. She blamed everyone but herself, claiming she was the victim of a coordinated campaign of harassment and a neighborhood-wide conspiracy to undermine her authority. She vowed to fight for the soul of Willow Creek Heights, but everyone knew it was over. Her reign of beige terror was finished. She'd been defeated, not by lawyers or lawsuits, but by a medieval castle gate, a moat, and the collective will of a neighborhood that had finally had enough of her tyranny. The Queen of Conformity had been dethroned, her kingdom reduced to rubble, her legacy a cautionary tale whispered among the residents of Willow Creek Heights. Smith Keep, meanwhile, was thriving. The castle gate, once a source of controversy, became a beloved local landmark, a symbol of the neighborhood's newfound freedom and a testament to the power of creative resistance. People would drive from miles around just to see it, to take pictures, to pose in front of the imposing stone archway and the massive wooden gates. It became a popular backdrop for social media posts, graduation photos, and even a few surprisingly tasteful engagement announcements. Local groups started using the gate as a setting for various activities. The local theater group used it for photo shoots, and even a small outdoor performance of Romeo and Juliet, with the gate serving as the balcony, of course. The neighborhood children, inspired by the castle theme, started holding mock battles in my front yard, armed with cardboard swords and homemade shields. Even the local book club held a meeting there, discussing medieval literature under the watchful gaze of the gargoyles. It was a bizarre, wonderful, utterly unexpected transformation. My act of petty revenge had inadvertently created a community hub, a source of neighborhood pride, and a constant reminder of the glorious downfall of Brenda Mortimer. Eventually, Brenda's house was sold. And the new neighbors? They were, thankfully, the complete opposite of Brenda. They were a young couple, artists, who were thrilled to be living next door to the famous castle house. They embraced the neighborhood's quirky charm, they loved the gate, and they even, to my delight, added their own touch of medieval flair to their property. A small, whimsical dragon sculpture perched atop their mailbox. One afternoon, as I was pretending to polish the iron studs on my castle gates, the new neighbor, a woman named Sarah, walked over. "So," she said with a grin, "what's the story behind the castle gate? I've heard so many versions." I smiled. "It's a long story," I said, "but the short version is I had a disagreement with the previous owner of your house about a blue door." She laughed. "Well," she said, "I think it's amazing. It's inspiring. It makes me want to build a giant trebuchet in my backyard." "Do it," I said. "I'll even help you aim it." The Willow Creek Heights HOA, once a bastion of beige tyranny, was a shell of its former self. The new board, composed of residents who actually enjoyed living in the neighborhood, was focused on fostering community, organizing social events, and generally staying out of people's way. The endless stream of violation notices had ceased, the petty rules had been relaxed, and the atmosphere of fear and conformity had been replaced by a sense of freedom and, dare I say it, fun. The clipboard-wielding tyrants had been overthrown, replaced by a council of chill, reasonable human beings. And so I remained, the unlikely lord of my suburban castle, the accidental champion of architectural freedom. Smith Keep stood as a proud monument to my victory, a constant reminder of the day I took on the HOA and won. It was a warm summer evening. I was sitting in my throne, a ridiculously oversized and surprisingly comfortable wicker chair, positioned strategically in front of the castle gate, enjoying the cool evening breeze. The flickering torch sconces cast a warm, inviting glow on the stone archway, and the gargoyles seemed to grin down at me with approval. Who knew that a blue garage door and a burning desire for revenge could lead to all this? I guess sometimes you just gotta build a castle to find your peace, I thought, smiling to myself. It had been a long, strange, and utterly absurd journey, but it had all been worth it. I raised my glass of iced tea in a silent toast. To the castle gate of Willow Creek Heights, may it forever stand as a monument to the triumph of creativity over conformity, and a warning to all future HOA tyrants.